Welcome to another episode of the Responsive Lab. Super excited about today's episode. It's going to be a little bit of a different structure. What happened is a couple weeks ago, we had a webinar where we jumped into talking about the 5 essentials for AI success for nonprofits. And what we found, we had a ton of people there and we had so many awesome questions that we said, hey, we need to first of all, end this webinar because people have other things that they need to do. And we said we need to turn on the microphones and record a podcast where we dive into these. And so super excited to have Nathan Chappell, our Chief AI Officer, here today, along with me and Carly, where we are going to jump into all of these questions. Nathan, you ready to be bombarded with all the questions?
I love it so much. It keeps me on my toes. I feel the adrenaline pumping. Let's go.
Excellent. We're going to jump right in. One of the things actually we got on the webinar I thought was a great question that I think can help just sort of level set as we jump in was around just sort of defining AI. So the question was, AI is a very broad term. Can you define what we mean by AI in the conversation that we're having today?
Yeah, what a great way to start. And that's what's so hard about AI because, we often do polls to find out, where people are at in terms of either their adoption or their comfort level and even with some of the language. And you find any audience, you have some people that like literally just heard about ChatGPT yesterday and other people that use it 4 times before their first cup of coffee. And it's always hard because you feel like you're like letting some people down, and for other people, you're not giving them the substance that they want. So when we talk about AI, it's always good to just level set. One is what most people think of AI. They're thinking of what we consider modern AI. That is, what was created through the advent of ChatGPT on November 30th, 2022, date that I have tattooed on my arm. Just kidding. But
I was going to ask, do you
I,
actually? Maybe you
I
should.
don't. Maybe. And so since then, there are just like a flurry of different types of generative AI forms that people just refer to as AI. But in all reality, AI is it's like a toolbox with lots of different tools in it. And I often describe this toolbox. In fact, when I present, I usually have a slide and it will show a picture of a toolbox. And instinctually at your house, like you go to grab your toolbox because you have to hang a picture on the wall, you're going to grab the hammer, not a saw. Or if you've got to cut a piece of wood, you grab the saw, not a hammer. And you know which tool is appropriate for which application. AI is like that toolbox. And in that, one of the key tools that most people don't really spend a lot of time thinking about is what's called predictive AI. So machine learning and deep learning, which actually the term was coined machine learning in 1953, I think, or 1955 by John McCarthy. And it took many, many years for AI to learn to be able to beat a human at playing chess up and from like 1955 up until like 1984 or something like that. Don't fact check me, but it's around that time. And so that technology had existed for a long time. And the premise was that if you have enough data, you can actually make predictions of what's going to happen next. And so machine learning, deep learning has gotten really good to the point that, most private sector companies aren't trying to sell. Samsung is not trying to sell a phone to everybody on the planet. Nike's not trying to sell a pair of shoes to everyone on the planet. They've now, using big data, they're able to isolate individuals that are most likely to do a thing. We've applied that form of AI, predictive AI, to identifying, which prospects look the most like donors and which donors are likely to give again. That was work that I started really with that hypothesis in 2017 and moved on. But that technology by itself, we found it was very limited. Like predictive AI with machine learning and deep learning was great, except that unless you had a way to activate it, it really didn't help you, right? It was just like, oh, this makes me feel warm and fuzzy. I have a picture of what a donor looks like, but it
Yeah.
actually doesn't do anything. So we're kind of waiting for a number of years for the other side of the coin to drop. And that other side of the coin was what people consider modern AI, generative AI, which operates in the opposite way, where predictive AI takes a lot of data and distills it down into small amounts to give you really clear direction. Generative AI takes all the world's data and makes predictions on, basically creating more data.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden we find ourselves in a moment where we've got predictive AI and generative AI together that provides clarity and action. And that opens up an enormous set of possibilities. There are other tools in the toolbox, and it's probably not worth getting into. I think in terms of impressing your friends at a dinner party, predictive AI, generative AI, machine learning, large language models, those are the key kind of from a vernacular perspective that I think most people need to know.
Yeah, I know this was a follow up to a webinar where you probably already covered this, but just for our nonprofit listeners who aren't connecting the dots, can you give an example for generative AI and predictive AI in the fundraising world of how it would be used?
Yeah, yeah, it actually solves for like this age-old question, and people get so sick of this thing. But like, I came across this quote by Aristotle that he wrote about 2,300 years ago. That it was literally the quote was very close to the idea of giving away money is easy, but to decide who to give it to, when to give it, how much, in what way, and for what purpose is really hard. And we call those the Aristotle barriers because for 2,300 years, like if anybody had a barrier of like, I want to give away money, but I don't know, or I want to ask for money, but I don't know in what way I should ask, people just wouldn't give. And so we started with this premise in 2017 with machine learning, which is like it didn't matter how much we asked for, when we asked, in what way, or for what purpose, if it wasn't the right person to begin with. And so we started building with machine learning, predictive AI, a picture of what does an engaged person look like the day before they make a gift, right? And so basically we were able to decouple by every donor. We basically like roll back the wayback machine, the time machine, to be like, what was all their data? What did it signal the day before they made their first gift? And then we basically were able to develop a picture of what a donor looked like. And it, not surprisingly, worked really well. And so that at scale, so that actually is something that I focused on since 2017, have 2 patents on, but as essentially it's what I was brought into Virtuous, I think in part to help lead our predictive AI deployment, which is called Insights, and we're launching Insights, and it's super exciting to have that embedded in our CRM. Really amazing. The other side, to answer your question, is the generative side. Is now that I have a prediction on who's going to do something, what is a way to use generative AI to custom create language? So just for one, I mean, there's a million ways to use generative AI to create personalization, but like one would be, I have all this information about this person and what they look like their engagement, like what are their preferences. Use generative AI to create a custom communication that they are more likely to resonate with versus like the antiquity, the old kind of idea of like dear donor or dear alum kind of thing. Like we're moving
Yeah.
way past that to what we consider like micro segmentation. So it's like two sides of a coin. The one side is using predictive AI to decide who, and then on the other side of the coin is how. And that's where predictive and generative, those two things together really complement so well, to a point where we're redefining fundraising to a term called precision philanthropy, which precision philanthropy really signals this idea that there's no such thing as donors or prospects. They're just individuals that have a varying degree of connection to you. And that
Mm.
connection changes all the time. We have these tools to identify and activate that connection.
Got it. So generative AI would be like writing an appeal, and predictive AI would be like, which major donor should I talk to next?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, great. So many nonprofits listening might still be in the really beginning stages of their AI strategy. One of the questions people asked in the webinar was, what are some ways to create an AI strategy for our nonprofit? Now, we only have 42 more minutes,
Yeah.
Nathan. So like,
We'll
if
keep
you,
it short.
yeah,
I mean, it really, no, I think it's such an important question. And I think, MIT just released a study that showed that 95% of AI initiatives failed. And the reason why the 95% failed versus those that 5% that succeeded were those that succeeded were very focused. They were focused on a problem that they were trying to solve. And they became just, kind of maniacal about solving that problem. So I think from a strategy perspective, you have to decouple adoption from strategy. Adoption is very high. Most people are using some sort of AI to like, proof a letter or something like that, or come up with a new idea on how to thank a donor, but they're not thinking about it from a strategic perspective. So I think developing an AI strategy starts with having AI governance. And I don't know if anyone asked about AI governance, so we'll get there, but creating an AI governance policy that says we're going to use AI that aligns with our values. And then once you've done that, then you start to look at what are the strategic things that I'm trying to achieve? What are my objectives or initiatives? Then essentially, once you identify what those initiatives are, what are the areas in which AI can help increase the chance of success, either increase the chance of success or shorten the amount of time that it would take to get there. And so I think that just takes not a lot, but just some really deliberate thinking.
Now, one of the things I know can happen when there's unknowns is it can create fear.
Mm.
And in a vacuum, there can be fear or there's myths and things like that. And I'm curious what some of your suggestions are for organizations looking to communicate the growth that they see via AI to donors without creating fear from that AI use, especially among those who may have some unknowns or aren't, as familiar.
Yeah, so I think if you decouple internal fear versus external fear, at some point, Cheering Koshi, who works for Kindsight, and I were walking down a street in DC, and we're like, we've already been using AI for a while, and we we paused in the middle of a street, probably not the best idea, and I think it came to me, I'm like, we've made so many assumptions about using AI, but who's asked the donors? And at that point, no one had. So we actually set out, we interviewed 1,000 donors, and not surprisingly, donors are very much in favor of nonprofits using AI in the same way that they're in favor of using the internet. I mean,
Yeah.
how ridiculous is it that a donor be like, "Hey, I want you to go and amplify your mission, but you can't use the internet because there's like some bad things with it that I don't understand." So donors are very much in favor of. In fact, we just did our second study. It's being released here in just another week or two. And so, all to say, donors very much in favor, and but they do believe that disclosure of how they're using AI is important. So having a AI governance policy and then disclosing the appropriate use of AI, not every sense of like you don't disclose the fact that I use the internet to like host a Zoom webinar or something. So if you're using a bot that looks like a human and talks like a human and has a name of a human, you better disclose the fact that that's not a human. And so I think when we come down to that, the fears are not that you're using AI, it's that you're essentially using it in ways that feel manipulative.
Mm.
Internally, I think a lot of the fear is based on um, just fear of change. And to be honest, I think that fear of change can be reduced when you build an AI governance policy that says, look, just because we can do something doesn't mean we should, but we will use AI in ways that align with our values as an organization because our missions are that important that we are, it becomes a moral imperative to do that. And I think that diminishes the fear and moves it from fear to basically need.
Yeah, I think that's a really great clarification. Obviously, this is the Responsive Lab podcast, so we work for Virtuous. And one of the questions that someone asked in the webinar is, how does Virtuous currently use AI? And what's more exciting for me to hear you talk about, Nathan, is how do you see the future innovation surrounding AI at Virtuous look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's why I'm here. So I'd been a fan of Virtuous for probably about 7 years of the 10-year journey. I think it was about 3 years in, having, spent 20 years in nonprofit, I became aware of an org that just talked differently and thought differently about one, having a double bottom line and being dedicated to not just selling products, but actually, increasing net generosity. By that time, it was $1 billion, and now it's $10 billion. It's like pretty crazy.
Yeah.
But the other was this idea that this responsive side that having a CRM that holds data, that's important, right? I mean, it's safe and secure and I can sleep at night. But the idea behind Virtuous was that it wasn't enough. It was that you're holding data, but then you're putting the data to work and you're like taking action. So when Gabe Cooper, the founder of Virtuous, called me sometime earlier in the year, and he's like, we have this like we're just like insatiable desire to like innovate, and we want to just do we want to leverage AI to amplify mission. I mean, he kind of had me at hello because I'd been such a fan, for quite a while, and so it didn't take a lot of convincing. But at the end of the day, what he described was some early efforts that Virtuous took in predictive AI, so machine learning, deep learning, and that is now manifest in what our product Insights is, which is amazing. It's actually 8 years of my work at an outside vendor, basically doing this work where data had to be transferred, scored, and transferred back, which poses all kinds of security risks, but also is slower and more expensive. To be able to do that inside a CRM is kind of ridiculous. Like to be able to score every single constituent in your data every day without having to send data somewhere else and do it super affordably, that's like crazy cool. So that's number one. It starts the backbone, or sort of that's the North Star of all of our AI initiatives, because it doesn't matter how much you ask, or what you ask for, or in what way, if it's not the right person. So that becomes like the cornerstone of all of our AI initiatives. We have a lot of clarity on who's going to do what. From there, generative AI is really our thing of like whether or not we're building dossiers. And so we have applications that can take a prospect and be like, hey, here's a dossier. Instead of you having to go to another like ChatGPT or Claude and do that, to be able to do that inside Virtuous, amazing. And then with our acquisition of Momentum, being able to literally give data wings. Like I've been a fan and an advisor of Momentum for a couple of years, because I believe that like having data wasn't enough, that there were just like so many opportunities to like put that data to work, and that Momentum does that in spades. So those are the two key buckets. And then we have some other natural language query, meaning like I just want to query all my data in natural language. Let's like, and basically say, who are the people I should invite to an event in New York, and have access to my data through natural language. That's ridiculously cool. And also like what we're building right now. And then the last part is what may be a little less sexy from a client perspective, is agentic AI, but we're really looking at all the menial tasks, like the just mundane things that nobody wants to do, and providing essentially agentic AI, which is AI agents that you can then deploy for those menial tasks. And so our future, well, our current is very, very strong in predictive and generative. Our future is ridiculously fun and cool in the agentic side, where I'd just tell people to stay tuned, because we have over 20 different um, paths in play right now, where we see agentic AI can play a formative role in supporting different job functions within nonprofits.
Yeah, I think that's really great insight. I'm really excited about Gabe's recent talk about the future of AI at Virtuous, and it will be exciting to see how that gets integrated into the product. Just a follow-up question. Someone asked, does AI have the capability to aggregate publicly available information from platforms like LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, X, and others, capturing data points such as birthdays, anniversaries, addresses, etc., and integrate that information into Virtuous's database?
So the answer is complicated. It's yes and no, and it's
Yeah.
partly legal and partly illegal. So there are some. So basically, um, if there's any publicly available data, so meaning like completely open source data that lives on a website that's not gated or guarded, then absolutely. And that's the type of AI I was just referring to. Agentic AI agents you can basically tell them to like go to every 990 is a great example. So 990 is obviously a tax form for a nonprofit, is publicly available data on by intention. Like nonprofits exist by and for the public, so their 990s are also public. So you can scrape all of that 990 data to your heart's content. No issues there. LinkedIn though has very clear like user guidelines that you can't download and scrape all of the data. So yes, you can use AI to do that, but you'll actually be doing it in ways that violate their usage policies. The same is true for almost all social media, and the reason for that, Facebook, X, whatever, they're in business to make money, and if their data becomes completely available to everybody for free, then they won't be in business. And so I would say yes to just publicly available data, but not all data.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do think that the Insights product has a lot of this and more. Like, where did you go to college? Do you own a boat? A bunch of kind of random things like that. That's all publicly
It's
available
all
data. And
publicly available. Yeah.
some of it is empty, like because maybe for me or you, we don't know if we own a boat. But for those that we can get the data, it's filled in. So I feel like
Yeah.
in that product, there's a lot of fields like this.
Yeah, I mean, and you can only, and people question the reliability of third party data, and they should. I mean, it's only as accurate as whatever website you're buying it from. It's only as
Yeah.
accurate as that third party provider is legally scraping that data, right? And so if the data doesn't exist, it's no one's fault. It's just the reality of the situation. Some people are better at hiding things like their boats or their airplanes or whatever, and some people aren't. And so, all to say is that you have to take it as it's almost like the cherry on top. Like third party data is valuable and it helps models perform better, but the models work without it. And so the reality is just essentially a cherry on top to make them perform a little bit better, to give you a little bit more insight. But it's not something that it's like, oh, I hate it. I'm not going to use AI because it doesn't work. So it's just
Yeah.
it's a nice to have.
Yeah. So far, I've successfully hidden my extensive boat collection
I know, I've looked.
from the
I
world.
haven't.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I do. No, I don't. I don't own a boat. I do own a kayak, though. So
Oh,
if anyone's
Ah,
interested, I will publicly share that
that's
information.
I don't think that's a predictor of wealth.
it.
No, especially since I bought it used off Facebook Marketplace. But it's a fun time anyway.
Yeah.
It's a predictive of your enjoyment of the outdoors, though, and so
Yes,
it
there you
would be a
go.
valid data point, to be honest. Like I and all data has value. It's just not. It doesn't have the same value. So
Yeah.
some data is incrementally helpful, and some's very helpful. That one would be just a nice to have.
That's actually a great example. We didn't plan that, but that's a great
Yeah.
that's a great example of people for people to think through data. And I know we've kind of touched on this some privacy, security, safety, some of those questions. I know that's a handful that we got in, and
Mhm.
one in particular was if we're feeding our internal data or donor data into any AI platform, is that data compromised? And I think. Maybe a part B to this question could be helping people understand, like, how do you actually interact with your donor data without putting it all just into an AI platform. Like, how do you interact with it in a way that it's respectful of the data, safe and secure?
Yeah, I'll probably say this till my dying day. It'd probably go on my tombstone. If you're not paying for the product, you are the product. Like, and it's not just true with AI; it's true with any technology. If you're not paying for a product, you are the product. That means that you shouldn't be surprised that someone is monetizing your data. So if you're not paying for it, some people are just so surprised by that. But it's like, how do you think they stay in business? If you
Mhm.
think about it just for a second, that's why I mean, privacy and security is super important, and this is why I spend a lot of time advocating for what's considered responsible and beneficial AI, because the reality is, like, we operate in the currency of trust, and that sounds kind of trivial, but like, we don't have products and services to back us up. I mean, in all reality, if I ask an audience of 1,000 people, like, how many in this audience use a Facebook product? So you use like Facebook, Meta, whatever, or Instagram or WhatsApp, like 80%, 90%. My hands go up to some degree. And then the follow up question, how many trust Mark Zuckerberg? And literally every hand goes down. And so we're used to understanding the balance between trust and convenience, right? And so when we think about trust from the nonprofit context, that has to be at the forefront. Like, that has to be the deciding factor of what we do. So, using free products, totally fine if there's no confidentiality needed. Like, if there's no protected information, there's no credit cards, like, to your kind of heart's desire, like, if the stakes are very low, and you're just thinking of, like, I want to use a tool to identify new and creative ways to thank people, that's like very low stakes. But if you're talking about a specific donor that's given an exact amount of money and your Brian, your giving history, do it inside a platform that you understand is in a secure environment. So, like Virtuous, like building our AI inside Virtuous really mitigates a tremendous amount of harm from data going to other places that you're not familiar with. And so, using a platform that you understand the security parameters for, and then and leveraging that to the fullest extent. That's why I think building our suite of AI inside Virtuous is such a safety blanket for organizations that need to protect and prioritize trust.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also a way, like this person was asking, like, how do I learn more about my donors without putting their data into an AI platform? Well, if you keep your donor data in your CRM and then we're scraping the internet for all the public information, then you're not going out there and uploading all
Right.
your donor names into Chat GPT
Yeah.
and, sharing it with whoever.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's really good to partition, any of that confidential first party data, the data that you've collected on your donors, making sure that's secure. Use that third party data to augment it. If you want to find somebody that you don't know about and you're thinking maybe they'd be a good, donor for our organization, feel free to use ChatGPT, do some deep research, and be like, just like you would on Google, be like, hey, tell me about this person, and let me know if you think they, have an interest in the environment. Do they own a kayak? Whatever, and then and then bring that back and then put that in your CRM. So there's appropriate uses of it, but anything that you wouldn't want on the front page, and frankly, anything that you wouldn't want to sit across from a donor and be like, "Hey, by the way, we just, found this information on you," and you'd be
Yeah.
embarrassed by, like, let that be the litmus test for what's, or
Yeah.
if it feels cringeworthy, then it's probably cringeworthy.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, this question I'm really interested in your answer, which is, where do wealth screening companies get their data? Is it AI generated? And can it be replicated for a limited budget? Which is such a non-profiter
I know,
question. It just
right?
like speaks to my fundraising heart.
I know. I mean, I spent 20 years in nonprofit, so I would have probably asked that question too.
Yeah.
And in all reality, yeah, you can't do it affordably on your own because there's a thing called scale, and organizations are able to offer lower prices when they figure out techniques to scale things and to be able to write technology that does these really quickly. But 90+% of the information that is coming from a traditional kind of quote unquote wealth screening provider, a data provider, whether it be Donor Search, Kindsight, Windfall, whoever, even Data Axle and Experian, is publicly available data. And so, in fact, Experian is selling a lot of that data to them. So they're either getting it for free or they're buying it. And so most of those organizations are data brokers, and there's a lot of value in having detail. Like if you're doing really, really deep research on someone, there's value in understanding all the nuances of their data. Um, it's not just to disabuse people from the idea that um, how much someone might give is not the same as will they give it all. And our very first data science project showed us that wealth data was only 10% indicative of altruism. So, like the fact that I'm generous or altruistic, like 80% of nonprofits use wealth data as a primary way of finding a prospect, but it's actually the least effective way because wealth and altruism are not directly correlated. So, with that said, be careful of it. Use that data to like augment, like not whether the person is generous or make a gift, but use it to determine how much I should ask for. If you've already done your hard work and you've engaged them, there's no substitute for that. Use that wealth data to help guide you on how much someone might be willing to contribute. And then the last part, in trying to do it yourself, new tools like agentic AI are helpful, but they're not yet scalable and affordable to be able to scrape data at in bulk. But individual searches, really good. Use ChatGPT Deep Research or Gemini Deep Research, and then go from there.
Yeah, I would just clarify, the wealth screening data is not AI generated.
No, right.
The predictions are using AI to help determine like what the ask amount should be or whatever, but we're not generating like, yes, they're a boat owner and they went to this high school and whatever. So that's not AI generated at all.
Right. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, publicly available data.
Yep.
One of the things I know we heard a few times, I've heard it probably every time the conversation comes up around AI, is people asking about the ethical and environmental concerns. And some of that I think is a little bit of like, we hear things and we hear somebody say, well, AI is terrible for the environment.
Yeah.
And so, people run with, well, I don't know if that's true or not. So I guess that's true. Or, there's certain things that are myths, certain things that are true and really valid. So can you speak to those? I know that's probably a whole podcast in and of itself.
It is. Yeah.
But as much as you can here.
Well, I mean, I think it's important when you talk about like ethical first. So, like when I started working in AI/ML, so in machine learning, there was a lot of concern of ethics. Like, there were organizations like Google, and actually Twitter at the time before they were X, had created an algorithm that was like ageist, ableist, Islamophobic, and everything else. And it was, and some of these things like made the headlines. Like they were creating these algorithms that are super biased because they're like they didn't know what they were doing. They had training data. They just didn't have good protocol. So it went from like privacy and security to ethics to whatever else, and now it's the environment as being kind of this like almost quote unquote an excuse to like not use AI. That's what I mean. Not that these concerns aren't valid; they're all valid and warranted to like be thoughtful of. In all fairness, it's a really, really complicated question. I'm writing an article on it, and I've been dreading this article a little bit because it's highly politicized. And but at the end of the day, it warrants a conversation. But if you think of it just for a second, I mean, yes, power is essentially the greatest limitation to the advancement of full AI to like artificial general intelligence. So, you know, governments and power entities are scrambling to like develop more power, but AI will actually be one of the biggest solvers for power. And so we're already
Mm.
seeing breakthroughs in like fusion energy and most likely, you know, AI compute will move into space at some point too and be generated by the sun. And so, yes, for now, power is a big concern and limitation. But if you think about a tool that you're using, like if I, in fact, my first book took me 2 years to write. I did, however many hours in front of a computer using energy, like with 1,000 Google searches and reading stuff online, like tons of energy usage, like to do it, 2.5 years. My second book took 4 months to write because I had this tool that I was able to help create analogies with and do my research for me and all this stuff. So all to say is like it's the environmental impact is not as easy to quantify as it just costs, you know, this much to do a prompt or this much to train a model. In all reality, the efficiencies that we're gaining in the use of AI are offsetting a lot of that environmental impact. And so, stay tuned for the article, and I'll probably lose half my LinkedIn, connections after that goes out. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
Well, we'll look forward to it for sure and be sharing it because I know it's an important part of the conversation and we're gonna have more, I think, episodes, webinars, content like this where we can answer these questions because it is sort of while for you and for you know a lot of people at the forefront, it's not a new conversation. For a lot of people, it
Yeah.
really is, and so
I,
there's a need for
yeah. With
this.
that, I would say don't let the environment be an excuse not to use AI. The reality is that there are a lot of ways you can offset your carbon footprint. So if
Mm.
you're really concerned, I mean, I've done a lot of training for environmental nonprofits who are deeply concerned about this. You know, in all reality, I mean, they're all using AI because their missions deserve it, right? Their missions are so important, and it's always this race to scale impact, right? And so this is a tool that exists. I mean, the printing press had enormous environmental impact on trees, right? You know, but
Yeah,
we didn't stop using it. And so at the end of the day, be aware of it, but also be aware that if that is something that's super core to your belief system, then take a more proactive effort to offset your carbon footprint in the other things that you do.
yeah, yeah. That's a great call. Well, we're gonna close. That was our last official question. We do have our mystery question though. It's our
No,
podcast
perfect.
tradition, and so we wanna continue that. We'll link to the webinar that we mentioned in the show notes. I know we have a lot of resources too coming out for folks, so make sure you subscribe to our newsletter, subscribe to the podcast, and we'll keep sharing these as Nathan's working on them as we're distributing them. But I wanted to ask a mystery question that had absolutely nothing to do with AI, with technology, or anything of the sort, since our whole conversation
Do we
is
all
based
have a
on
kayak? And where did we get it from?
Or what kind of kayak and where is your
no.
favorite place?
As a rule, you can't ask yes or no mystery questions. I feel
Okay,
like
okay.
yeah. All right, the question is this. In your opinion, this is an opinion question. If animals could talk, which animal would be the rudest and why?
Mm. So Carly's going first.
If you don't have an answer that pop in your head, I definitely have an answer.
I have an
So
answer. I want to hear what Carly's answer is first.
I mean, honestly, like the first thing that came to my mind was a skunk
Mm.
because I just feel like they would use their bodily issues to just be as rude as they smell.
but see, I feel like a skunk is just like so misunderstood. Like
That's
I
such
think
a
they're like
Scott answer.
Just
they're like the
confused.
cutest thing. Like that's literally the best that they got. You know what I mean? Massive claws, huge teeth, nothing. It's like the best I can do is like make it really unpleasant for us. So, but
Yeah.
that's
Well,
great.
you're going to share yours, right, Scott?
Yeah, I will.
Okay. Yeah. You know, it's funny because I had a friend, we used to talk about this. I'm a dog person and I've, you know, always had dogs. I've had cats too. And it's funny because he and I talked one night. We're like, you know, dogs are like people and cats are like mean people. And I can qualify this. I can qualify this because I have a friend who is a captain of police, and he would say the worst thing as a police officer you could ever do is go to a house call where there's been basically a person that no one heard from for about 2 or 3 weeks, and then a neighbor called maybe because they smelled something coming from the house. A dog will literally lay down by its owner who passes and starve itself, basically, to in loyalty. What will a cat do? The opposite of that. And we don't have to get into the gruesome details, but as a police chief, he was like, it is literally the worst. So
Oh,
I stick behind I stick behind cats.
I feel like dogs are like extroverts and cats are like introverts. You come home and dogs are like so excited to see you, and cats just like look at you and they like look away. And that's kind of like what an introvert does. They're just like, hey,
Yeah,
hey,
yeah.
glad you're here.
What are you looking at? And
Yeah.
you have to earn my trust every day over and
Yes,
over again.
exactly.
It's
Yes.
people who like cats love the psychological game that comes with owning cats. And I think people that just have dogs, I just want the simplicity of a dog greeting me at the door.
I want blind loyalty
Yeah, my
every
life's
single
complicated
morning.
enough.
Yeah. So I have a specific type of animal and specifics like I don't know, not species, maybe species. A red-winged blackbird. I think that they are evil to the core. I've been attacked by many.
What?
Really?
And
While you were
on the
kayaking or when?
Right.
not on a kayak, thankfully, because that would be a huge safety risk. But out on walks, out on runs. I don't know if it's because of my height. I'm a bit taller or what, but yeah, I've had like 3 or 4. I mean, to the point now, I do live in a part with a lot of natural prairie, but come the spring, neighbors will email each other like, "Hey, reminder, be safe out there." I mean, it's
Wow.
like
And it's
pretty
not
bad.
alligators. It's like the red-winged blackbird.
It's a red-winged blackbird
Okay.
because too, it's not just I was attacked, but like they will sit. So I live in a spot with a lot of prairie, a lot of paths through it, but they will sit on trees and just they'll follow you. They'll to where I bring something with me to like kind of wave above my head, wave at them. If you're from Northern Illinois, Southern Wisconsin, I think you've experienced some of this at times. And I'm not the only one. I mean, my brother-in-law nearly blew out his knee because he got attacked by one and sent him in a
What?
spiral. So
My neighbor's
they're
a
atrocious.
world-class birder. I am asking about this tonight. Like, this
Yeah.
is definitely on my list. Yeah.
Please do.
Amazing.
Yeah. And they're the worst. So I imagine that the words that they're saying as they're squawking to me are just like the most
Yeah,
heinous,
I think you win.
rude
I mean,
things.
Yeah, for
skunk,
sure.
skunk, whatever, cats, if, they're just kind of turds, but like, I think
Yeah,
this is like a stalker in the worst
Yeah.
possible way. All right. All
exactly.
right.
Yep.
Hats off.
Exactly. Well, Nathan, thank you again for taking the time to answer these questions. So valuable. We're going to continue to provide this content for folks, not only as we provide innovative tools and really dive into how do we innovate around nonprofit, but also how do we think about it philosophically? How do we dive into it ethically? And how are we responsible as we use this technology? So really appreciate your time and energy today answering these questions.
Awesome. Great to be here. Anytime. Let's do it again.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Responsive Lab. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a review. Your feedback helps us continue to bring you the best content, and we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and join the discussion. We love talking all things generosity and technology, and this podcast is fueled by Virtuous, the responsive fundraising platform that works for you. Virtuous is a great example of using technology to scale your fundraising and personal relationships with your donors. To learn more, visit virtuous.org/learn more. Until next time, keep experimenting, keep innovating, and most importantly, keep making a difference. We'll see you back in the lab soon.